All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolute split-second choreography of a cockpit emergency. Specifically, we're looking at the standard operating procedures for an aborted takeoff. It is a wildly fascinating look at how human beings are trained to respond with pinpoint precision when literally every fraction of a second counts. We're going to break down exactly what happens behind that cockpit door when things go wrong, just moments before an aircraft leaves the Earth.
So, picture this. You're hurtling down a runway, right? The engines are absolutely roaring at maximum thrust, you're pinned back into your seat, and suddenly, a warning light flashes on the pilot's dashboard. Let's dive into exactly how flight crews handle this ultra-high-stakes scenario. And spoiler alert, it is not about panic. It is all about an incredibly structured, step-by-step procedure that kicks into gear the very millisecond danger is detected.
But before we get into the action, we first need to define the danger zone. In aviation, they talk a lot about ground failures. A ground failure is basically any malfunction happening on the ground prior to a highly critical metric known as V1. Now, V1 is the point of no return. It's the exact speed where a plane is fully committed to taking off, no matter what happens. If a failure hits before that V1 speed, or right after the plane is touched back down, the goal is crystal clear. Stop the airplane, evaluate the problem, take immediate action, and if things get really bad, evacuate.
And listen, there is zero room for hesitation or debate here. None. The trigger to abort is absolute. The rule is that a takeoff shall be aborted for any caution or warning light that illuminates prior to that V1 speed. The pilots aren't supposed to just sit there and play a guessing game wondering if it's just a minor sensor glitch or a catastrophic engine failure while they are accelerating at hundreds of miles per hour. If a light comes on before V1, the decision is already made for them.
So how does it start? It all kicks off with just one word. The instant either pilot notices the abnormality, literally whoever spots the warning light first, they loudly and clearly declare this single commanding word, abort. That's it. But that one single word instantly shifts the entire cockpit from a totally routine departure into a highly coordinated crisis mode. The aborted takeoff procedure is on.
Now, this is where the choreography gets absolutely wild. The split second the word is spoken, the two pilots instantly divide their labor to prevent total chaos. You've got the pilot flying, or PF, whose sole job right now is physically wrestling that massive aircraft and bringing it to a stop. Meanwhile, sitting right next to them, the pilot monitoring, or PM, handles the lightning-fast external communications and manages the blaring alarm systems. They are working completely in tandem, but on entirely different, life-saving tasks.
Let's look closely at the pilot flying first. Right after the abort command, they launch into a rapid-fire physical sequence. First, they snap the power levers to disk, which essentially neutralizes the propellers, and they'll hit reverse thrust if they need it. Second, they literally stand on the brakes, applying maximum braking power. Third, they have to physically fight the controls to maintain the runway centerline as the plane violently decelerates to a stop. And finally, they lock that emergency brake on.
Okay, so the emergency brake is set and the aircraft is physically halted. But the pilot flying's job isn't done. They immediately switch their audio panel over to the PA system and bark this urgent command to the back of the plane. Cabin crew at stations. This instantly puts the flight attendants on high alert, bracing them for a potential evacuation. And the second that's said, the pilot switches right back to the VHF radio.
But remember, the pilot monitoring hasn't just been sitting there watching this happen. At the exact same time the pilot flying was slamming on the brakes and talking to the cabin, the pilot monitoring is already working the radio. They fire off this incredibly precise message to air traffic control, aborting takeoff, stand by. And simultaneously, because multitasking is everything here, they are reaching up and canceling all those flashing caution and warning lights in the cockpit to clear out the visual and audio distractions.
So the 100-ton aircraft is safely stopped, the alarms are silenced, and ATC is notified. Only now do the pilots actually take a split second to breathe and assess the panel. Now they officially diagnose the problem. They check the instruments and formally call out the specific threat out loud. So in our example scenario from the source procedures, they'd call out, engine number 1 failed.
And things escalate quickly here. With the problem identified, the pilot monitoring gets right back on the radio to officially declare an urgency condition to air traffic control. They use the international distress signal for urgency, repeating pan 3 times, followed by their call sign, something like SG123, and the specific diagnosis. Engine number 1 failed, stand by.
All right, the problem is identified, but they are absolutely not out of the woods yet. A failed engine could mean a massive fire or a fuel leak. There is zero time to start flipping through a bulky paper manual. Instead, the pilot flying announces they are initiating a critical sequence of physical responses by calling out on-ground non-normal memory actions. As the name implies, these are absolutely vital, life-saving steps that the pilot must have completely memorized. It is pure muscle memory.
And this mental and physical checklist is intense. The pilot flying executes it blindly. They're basically quarantining the dead engine. They set the power levers back to that neutral disk detent. They yank the condition lever to completely cut the fuel off. They pull the fuel and hydraulic handle, and they shut off the tank auxiliary pump. In a matter of seconds, they are deliberately starving that failed engine of fuel, hydraulics, and power to prevent a catastrophic fire or any further damage.
Phew. Okay, once those rapid-fire steps are done, the pilot flying announces the memory actions are complete. And right here is where the tension in the cockpit finally begins to drop just a bit. We transition from pure, adrenaline-fueled memory to a methodical, physical manual. The pilot flying calls for the on-ground non-normal checklist. At this point, the pilot monitoring pulls out the actual physical checklist and reads through it step by step, verifying that every single memory action was executed flawlessly. Trust, but verify.
Now, with the aircraft completely secure and the checklist verified, the frantic pace of the cockpit totally slows down, and this is honestly my favorite part. It's only now that the pilot flying actually addresses the passengers, and listen to this standard announcement. It is so calm, so reassuring, and just remarkably understated. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical malfunction, we are proceeding back to the bay. Sorry for the inconvenience. I mean, you would never, ever know the intense, synchronized flurry of action that just took place on the other side of that cockpit door.
Which brings us to the final step of the whole procedure. The emergency is officially neutralized, the aircraft is safe, the passengers are informed, and the focus shifts entirely to logistics. The pilot monitoring just gets back on the radio and calmly requests air traffic control for a taxi back to the bay. When you step back and look at the timeline of all this, it's actually staggering. From 0 seconds when that light flashes and the abort is commanded, to max braking and communications within 5 seconds, diagnosing the failure at 15 seconds, memory actions completed in half a minute, and a calm passenger announcement and tax request right around the 2-minute mark. 2 minutes! It perfectly highlights how a flight crew identifies a severe threat, secures a massive aircraft, and manages hundreds of lives in practically no time at all, relying on pure, coordinated discipline.
So what's the big takeaway for us from this explainer? It's the astonishing power of procedural preparation. It really isn't about being fearless in the face of danger. It's about having a pre-programmed, endlessly practiced response for when things go wrong. It really leaves us to wonder, if pilots rely on this extreme mental choreography and strict division of labor to survive those critical first seconds of a crisis, how could we apply this incredible standard of memory-driven teamwork to other high-stakes fields, or even to emergencies in our own everyday lives? Definitely something to think about.